Hi everyone, it's Laura here for CC Designs, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to create a custom stamped pattern using the June and July stamp set. I started off my project by cutting some Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock to 4 by 4 inches, and now I'm using a pencil and a T-square ruler to mark the center of my panel. I'm doing this because I want to stamp my focal image in the center and then create a pattern all around it. And I'm using a very light hand because I want to be able to completely erase the pencil lines. I then positioned my panel in my stamp platform and I used those guides that I just created to place my focal image. I used this cute little duckling from the CC Designs June and July stamp set. Once I found the correct position for the image, I picked up the stamp by closing the lid of my stamp platform. I erased the pencil lines and then I went ahead and stamped the image with premium hybrid black ink. And I'm going to stamp it a second time so that I get a nice and crisp impression. To create my stamped pattern, I'm going to use my Wreath builder. So you can see I positioned the builder inside my stamp platform. I then centered my 4 by 4 inches white panel in the center of the Wreath builder. And then I picked one of the smaller images in the CC Designs June and July stamp set. I positioned it on my panel and then I'm going to go ahead and stamp down the image. I'm using that same premium hybrid black ink and I'm also going to stamp this image twice so that I get a nice and crisp impression. And then to replicate this image and create a pattern on my card base, I'm going to rotate my panel and again use the Wreath builder as a guide to position it. And I'm going to stamp my image a second time. I will continue to build my pattern by rotating the paper again and stamping the image a third time. And then finally I will rotate yet another time my paper and stamp my image the fourth time. This is just the skeleton of our pattern and we're going to fill it in with more images. I chose another stamp from the June and July stamp set. This is another image of a firework. I positioned it between two of the images that I had already stamped and then I repeated the same steps as before. So I stamped the image and then I rotated my cardstock using the Wreath builder as a guide before stamping it a second, a third and then a fourth time. I got a little smudge of ink on my panel and I wanted to show you what you can do if this happens to you too. In this case I used my Tombow Mono eraser. This is a sand eraser and I was able to basically erase the smudge away so that you can't see anything anymore. So that's quite a convenient tool to have in your stash. I then took these two stars from the Fa La 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 stamp set by CC Designs and I used them to really fill in my focal panel. I am stamping them with Simon Says Stamp Clementine ink and you will see that I will keep stamping them in different positions, always using the Wreath builder to create a wreath around my main image. And I will keep doing this until I get a full enough background. The stamping didn't take very long at all and you could also decide not to have as many images on your background, which means it's gonna take even less. But this is something that you can use for mass production and I think that the result is really fun and it will always be unique. Once I was done with the stamping, I started coloring my images. And for today, I decided to use my Spectrum Noir markers. I will be using mostly reds and blues and some yellows for the fireworks, and I'll be coloring the duckling yellow. I am adding my shadows as if the light is coming from straight ahead, which means that the darkest areas for this firework, for example, which is rounded, will be the ones on the sides, because those are the portions of the image that curve away from us, so they will be the ones that will catch the light the least, whereas the central part will be the lightest. For my reds, I am using DR7, DR6, CR8 and CR7, but you could skip one between the CR8 and CR7 if you wanted to, because these are very small images, so using 4 markers is not really necessary. To shade the white areas, I used some cool gray markers, and I used IG3 and IG1. And then I also added some blue details using TB7, TB5 and IB3. For the stars I used CT1 and CT4, and I added the CT1 also outside the lines of the images to sort of give a little bit of a glow effect without having to do any sophisticated coloring, but just to add some extra detail. As you can see, I skipped the coloring here in the video for the other fireworks because it was exactly the same, so I didn't think it was necessary to include it in the video. I colored the fireworks where the duckling is standing using the same color combinations that I used on the rest of the images. So again, red, blue and white, and some yellows for the stars. For the beak of the duck, I used OR3, OR2 and GB3. And again, I am keeping the areas that are on the sides and on the lower part of the beak the darkest, and I have my highlight at the top center of the beak. For the body instead, I used GB3, CT4 and CT2. I'm shading everything consistently with a light source in the center, so again I have my darkest areas at the sides of the duck. And then once I was done coloring the images, all I had to do was basically to prepare a base for my card and to take care of the sentiment. I decided to layer my focal panel over some blue and some red cardstock. The blue cardstock is cut at 4.5 by 4.5 inches and the red cardstock at 4.25 by 4.25 inches. I glued the red and blue cardstocks flat on top of each other, whereas to give a little bit of emphasis to the focal panel, I decided to raise it over one layer of foam tape. And at this point I felt that I wanted to frame my focal panel a little bit more. I honestly thought that it would have been nicer if I had layered it with some black cardstock too before gluing it to my red and blue cardstock. But to compensate for that, because I didn't want to unglue everything, I decided to add some dashed lines with a black memento marker. I used my Sakura white jelly roll pen number 10 to add some highlights to all the images. And I also coated the stars with my Spectrum Noir clear overlay pen to add some glitter to those images. For the sentiment, I decided to do some heat embossing over black cardstock with white embossing powder. And I picked the sentiment from the June and July stamp set that reads "Have a Blast." I stamped it with Versamark ink on some black cardstock. I coated the stamped sentiment with white embossing powder by Wow, and then I melted the embossing powder with my heat gun. I trimmed a very narrow strip around the sentiment, and then I used my scissors to create some fishtail ends on my banner. I first cut a tiny slit on the center and then sort of meet the center from the sides to create the fishtail part of the banner. And then I used my T-square ruler to adhere my sentiment straight onto my card front, and to give it a little bit of dimension, I raised it over one layer of foam tape. Because you can never have too much sparkle, I used crystal stickles on the stars, and then I added some glossy accents to the beak and the feet of the duck. I left the glossy accent to dry, and then I mounted everything on a top folding card base that is cut at 4.5 by 9 inches and scored at 4.5 inches, and that finished off my project. And that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments below, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. You can visit my blog for the full list of supplies, and I'll catch you guys soon with the next one. Ciao!